Hi, this is Frid from The Joy of Syntax and English in Color. And I wanted to talk today about the principal parts of verbs and the difference between regular and irregular verbs in English. Most of my students that I teach right now in person are people that speak German, have a German language background, and want to learn English. And so they do a lot of intuitive comparison with German. And it struck me that when verbs are discussed, people talk about regular and irregular verbs all the time. But in a way, I would find it much more helpful if we considered the history of the English and German language. When we look at at irregular and regular verbs, we find that what is called irregular verbs are the verbs that were formerly called strong verbs. And we have them in German as well. And both in English and in German, the strong verbs change the root vowel, or often make changes in the root vowel in order to build the principal parts. I'll share my screen and talk about it some more. And then you can see what I mean. Okay, so Stammformen is what they are called in German. Principal parts of the verbs are what they're called in English. Now, in a lot of school books that I've seen, and a lot of grammar books, people always give you three principal parts. They give you the basic infinitive, and people often forget that in English and in German there are actually 6 types of infinitives, but they always give you the basic infinitive. Then they give you the simple past, and they give you the past participle. A very classic word is to do, did, done. So I have all these lists in books, and there is to do, did, done, to have, had, to love. Oh, hang on, no. And they only give you the principal parts for the so-called irregular verbs, which are formerly the strong verbs, or were formerly the strong verbs of English. And let's look at a few irregular verbs. To be, to have, to go and eat and say. Those are irregular verbs, and they're not the most dramatic ones. So we have to go, went, gone is pretty good. But the problem is that went is actually, if I remember correctly, a past form from a different verb. We don't have the very dramatic ones here, like to think, thought, or to swim, swam, swum. That would be such a lovely one. I should have included that. To swim, swam, swum. What we see happening is that oftentimes with these formally strong verbs, the principal parts of the verb are created by changing the root vowel. Swim, swam, swum. And the same thing happens in the German verbs as well. Swim means schwimmen, and the principal parts are schwimmen, schwamm, geschwommen. Swim, swam, swum. Very similar. And there are basically 3 groups of strong verbs or irregular verbs nowadays. One group, there is no change in the principal parts. Cut, cut, cut. Put, put, put. Then there are those verbs where the simple past and the past participle share the same vowel, but that's different from the infinitive vowel, like to think, thought, to buy, bought. And then there are the verbs where, or to say, said, and then there are the verbs where all 3 forms are different, like to swim, swam, swum. And I find it helpful to remember that the irregular verbs are not necessarily irregular, but that they are the formerly strong verbs, and that in Old English, just as in Old German and in Old Icelandic, the strong verbs actually occurred in 7 groups. There were 7 patterns of root vowel change in order to create the principal parts. And the so-called regular verbs are what were formerly known as the weak verbs. And the weak verbs didn't change their root vowel, but added a suffix in order to change principal parts. And a weak verb or regular verb, for instance, is love, loved, loved. Now, what I notice in German students or German-speaking students a lot is that they think that these regular verbs don't have as many principal parts as the irregular verbs. And that comes into play when I ask them to form the present perfect. For instance, if I tell them, how do you form the present perfect? They say things, okay, for irregular verbs, you use have and the third form, meaning the past participle. And often they don't know that the third form is the past participle. And when you look at my overview here, it would be the fourth form, but it's often called the third form. Anyway, the past participle, and then they give the example, for instance, I have eaten. And then they say, and in regular verbs, you use the simple past, have plus the simple past. And I go, no. ED doesn't have to be the simple past. It can also be the past participle. And so I thought I would do two things with the help of this table here. I would show you that both so-called regular and irregular verbs have principal parts, and that it just so happens that the simple past and the past perfect, the past participle form of regular verbs looks the same. And then I also wanted to encourage people to include the forms of the present tense and the gerund plus the present participle in the list. And I'm going to make another video here very soon about the difference between gerunds and present participles. Nowadays in modern English, the gerund form and the present participle both end in ing. But up until the 14th century, that wasn't true. The present participle and the gerund had different endings. And if you want me to, I can give you examples from my favorite grammarian, George Currum, and show you what they looked like up until the 14th century. And I think we do our students a disservice when we call both gerunds and participles simply ing forms, because the gerund is actually a verbal noun and the participle is a verbal adjective, meaning that a gerund is a noun that has been created out of a verb, and a participle is an adjective that has been created out of a verb. And I hope you know that nouns and adjectives are totally different creatures. Nouns are words that, noun comes from the word name, from the Latin word nomen, and it means name. And nouns are is a word class, or is a noun is a name for a thing, a material thing that you can touch, or a thing in the abstract, like an idea or a concept. For instance, my glasses is a material. This is a material thing, and I can touch my glasses and put them on and all of that, and all that good stuff. And the name for this is glasses. And of course, this is a very complicated example because it's one of those plural words. Okay, let's take my mug with my lovely new logo that Jen Barbado made for me. Okay, so the mug, that's a thing I can touch. And then an abstract thing is like love. That's a concept. We can't touch it necessarily, but we can imagine it. Now, an adjective comes from Latin ad jacere, to throw at. Those are words that are thrown at nouns in some form or other and describe the characteristics of the nouns in some way, globally speaking. I'll make a video about that. But anyway, so we have the beautiful dog, and the dog is beautiful. So we have an adjective in two different functions, but it is connected to a noun. And you see that a beautiful dog and beauty are different creatures grammatically. And when we take, and anyway, I'm going to make a video about that. This has become rather longer, this little discussion, than I intended it to, but I wanted to tell you why I said gerund and gerund and present participle, not ing form. Anyway, so, and you see in the present tense, English doesn't have many inflectional endings anymore, which is a good thing, I think, for learners. Much more complicated when you learn German and Latin and French, because you have to learn all those verbal endings and all those other endings and forms anyway. So in English, in the present tense, in all verbs except for to be, you only have to remember two forms. The first form you use for the first person singular I, for the second person singular you. And by the way, that's actually not the second person singular, but it's the second person plural, which we use for both second person singular and second person plural. Story for another day. Anyway, so I have I have, you have, but he, she, it has. And you know the rule in German, we say he, she, it, and the S has to come along. He, she, it, das S muss mit. So we have to remember, for most verbs, we only have to remember, okay, we use a form that looks like the infinitive, actually isn't, but looks like the infinitive, except for the third person singular, where we need to add the third person S. But in to be, we actually have three different forms. I am, you are, he is. Okay, so, and by the way, for the verb to say, we have a pretty little difference in pronunciation. In standard English, in standard British and standard American English, we say I say and he says. Now there are dialects and different versions of English where that's not the case, but I'm not going there. And remember, I talk about British and American English, not because those are the best types of English that are around, but because those are the ones that are taught at German schools, at most international schools. And if you speak either standard British or standard American English, you will be understood by everybody. And we need to start somewhere. We can't learn everything all at once. And most of the dictionaries and most of the books that are available on the market teach one of these two types of English. And I know most about those. So those are the many reasons why I focus on these two. So if you are from a different language group, please don't feel excluded. And if you ever are interested in learning a different kind of English, go ahead. You have my blessings. Anyway, we need to start somewhere, and this is a good place to start for all the reasons mentioned. Anyway, so it's very important to remember that when I say I do is as it is the conjugated verb form, as it were. It just so happens to look like the infinitive. And does, does is the third person singular form. So when we learn verbs, we do well to look at these principal parts, not just at three. And to remember that regular verbs like love and walk also have a simple past and a past participle. They just happen to look the same, which is very convenient. Okay. I hope this helped you. Hang on, before I go, I want to show you something. My two very favorite dictionaries, I have many favorites, but these are free, completely free. And this is the one put out by Oxford. And what I like here is you can click on verb forms, and then it really spells out for learners, okay, the simple present form in British and American English. And by the way, this is the wrong symbol for American English. It should be a different one. I'll show you in a minute. I'll show you right now. Okay, for American English, we have something that looks like an O. There. Okay, we need to tell them. So I go, I go. It sounds different. Now, third person singular, goes, goes. Simple past, went. Past participle, gone for British, gone for American. the ing form, which is both the gerund and the present participle, going, going. I have the wrong symbol again. Okay, so these guys spell it out, except they don't say the simple present, they say the present simple. Half the grammar books say the present simple, the other half says the simple present. And same for past simple and simple past, same thing, different name. And by the way, also the progressive form is sometimes called the present or present progressive or past progressive or what have you progressive. And some people say the present continuous or the past continuous. Don't worry about it. More modern grammars tend to say progressive forms, but you hear continuous as well. Same thing, different name. Unfortunately, a little bit confusing to the learners. Okay, so, oh no, I wanted to show you this. When you look words up in Webster's Learners, which I also love a lot, you will see that they also give you these forms. They give you the third person singular, third person present tense, the third person singular present tense, the simple past, the past participle, and the ing form, which is the gerund and the present participle. However, they don't spell it out. Now, for this dictionary, you need to know this is the order in which they name these principal parts, and that's okay. You can remember that. But if you ever become shaky, you need to look it up in the, if you're sure, I meant to say, then you just look it up in Oxford's Learners. I think both dictionaries are very wonderful. If you're interested in American English, this one is better for you because it gives you American English and it uses a version of the IPA which is better suited to American English. And if you want to study British English, go ahead and use this dictionary. And there's this mistake here, and I'm going to actually write to them about that. But usually, both dictionaries are pretty thoroughly edited and researched, so there are not too many mistakes in them. You know, we all make mistakes. It's not, we can't help that, but it's always good to know, you know, when many people work on a project, you know, you have a better chance at getting things perfect. Okay, I hope this was fun for you. I hope it helped you. I think it's a very important thing. Please don't be intimidated by any of this. Just take baby steps, and yeah, if you have any requests, put them in the comment section below. And if you want help, I'm really good at creating little baby steps and leading people through the jungle of English and German. Take good care, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.